Part 2 of the webinar given by Dr. Nordquist on Wednesday, March 21, 2018, concerning prions, viruses, chronic systemic disease and dentistry gets into the actual prions and the diseases prions are associated with, such as mad cow disease and Alzheimer's disease. Part 1 discussed the precursor conditions that led to the modern epidemic of chronic disease, namely the spirochete diseases, such as syphilis, Lyme disease, and periodontal disease. This lecture was compiled and delivered at the time when great discoveries were being made concerning what chronic diseases are, how to avoid them, and/or, also, to reverse them. This lecture was given about 2 years before the Great Deception of the COVID-19 pandemic occurred. Today, March of 2023, looking back with 2020 hindsight, the plan of the word, plandemic, obviously indicates that the COVID-19 disease was specifically designed to conceal the new research that would eliminate chronic disease altogether. In Part 2, this lecture introduced for the first time the term the Sphinx virus, aka the God virus, and its role in chronic disease. As we go along in this presentation, we will interrupt the video to point out the latest discoveries made since 2018 concerning COVID-19 and its relationship to prions, beta-amyloid, and chronic diseases. Go back and review the video, the Sphinx virus, aka the God virus, so you can understand where the origin of the conditions occurred to allow this coronavirus to kill so many people with chronic diseases. The address will be included in the description below. Now, to Part 2 of the webinar.
We're going to get into more of the meat of the lecture. We're halfway through the lecture now. I've got to keep going here. But amyloid plaque is something that, well, amyloid, we pretty much know, or we all think we know what amyloid is, but recent studies show that amyloid is actually a normal protein and it's an antimicrobial. And McDonald, he's done a huge amount of research, and he actually has a video that if you had time to go, if I could play it for you, you could see that he shows that amyloid plaque is basically biofilms of active form of spirochetes. They have the round forms, and they're coated in amyloid plaque. In other words, the amyloid was trying to isolate the spirochetes, and it forms the amyloid plaque, which is the hallmark of Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's disease. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, that's quite personal for me because my first wife actually died from this. And before, this was several years ago. And I was told that 1 in 1 million get this. But the more research I did, the more I found out it's more common than what they purport to claim. This CJD is actually the human form of mad cow disease. And guess what? Beta amyloid is the hallmark of this disease. And researchers, well, over the years, felt that the prion, the folded over prion itself, called the prion-only theory, one prion can cause another prion to fold over, and a chain reaction occurs that begins this process of forming beta amyloid, which is stacking of the folded over version of the prions. We now know from research that virus or virus particles are involved. So when you think about it, when I first heard the prion-only theory, I'm thinking, how can a protein cause another protein to fold over? And it just didn't make any sense to me at all. And so in my research, I found a paper that virus particles are associated with the human or CJD.
Dr. Nordquist, at this point, is referring to Dr. Laura Manuelaitis' paper concerning the Sphinx virus that is discussed in the previous lecture, the Sphinx virus aka the God virus, which the link to this video is written in the description below.
And she feels that that gets into the DNA, the human DNA, and causes the protein or the prion protein synthesis to form folded over prions. Now that disease, or that makes more sense to me than the prion-only theory. And I think that that theory will prevail. It's the minority theory right now, but I think that that theory will prevail. It's actually the DNA that's been altered by a virus particle. And so I think if we're going to look for a cure to this, is finding a way to switch that protein synthesis to normal prions, which is not toxic. The paper that I wrote for Dentistry Today I wrote it maybe 5 months ago. I wrote it in 2 weekends and sent it to Bill Dome, and we had it ready to publish. And I sent a letter to the editor at Dentistry Today and told him, I said, I don't think there'll be another paper like this that will affect dentistry so much. Because if CJD, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease are caused by the same thing, folded over prions, which could be caused by a virus, then we got a problem. Because CJD in England is a big deal. And over there, they found that patients that have CJD, there's a potential of dentists passing this virus or whatever prions between patients. And they found that the nerve tissue and root canal teeth actually contain these particular prions, and that you can't sterilize the instruments, especially the endodontic instruments, so they're prohibited from reusing or multiple use of files and our endodontic files and reamers. But because CJD is so rare that the probability of contamination is very low. But when you get Alzheimer's disease and diabetes, now think of, and especially in my implant practice with multiple missing teeth, every single one of my patients had some form of neurologic problems, and the vast majority, if not all of them, also had diabetes. So now we have a probability of contamination between patients, and also, the staff and the dentists working in that, that mist that we work in every day, the high-speed mist that our heads are right in, that is, us catching this virus and passing it along, the probability gets much, much higher. So this keeps me up at night, to be honest with you, and I wake up early and thinking, how do we get rid of these? And it's a daunting question, and it worries me that we are passing it around as dentists, and we have to change some of the ways we sterilize, which we don't have right now. Bill Dome reports that ozone is the answer, but I'm not sure if it's the entire answer, because once you get ozone or get the spirochetes or whatever it is in the biofilm, it's even hard for ozone to get to it. So this is a question we're going to have to deal with as we move along in this discussion.
To summarize what Dr. Nordquist just said in layman's terms and including new information, Dr. Manuelitis discovered an old resident virus which is located and stored within the DNA of brain tissue called the Sphinx virus. In the video, the Sphinx virus, aka the God virus. This virus is activated by starvation within any species of animals, especially apropos to humans in this discussion, to save a starving population. The method the virus uses is, it kills off the older non-producing members. This virus stimulates the production of deformed prions, which further produces bastardized amyloid, which is called beta amyloid. This beta amyloid is the foundation of mad cow disease and the human form called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD, which is the human form of mad cow disease. The same beta amyloid is the basis of Alzheimer's disease and other chronic diseases, such as diabetes and other neurological diseases. So, if you find prions in a disease, Dr. Nordquist will describe the problem surgeons have as we continue this lecture.
Okay, now get into how these virus particles get to where they're at in the brain, as well as other places. And the research into this was very, very enlightening to me, because again, this is something I had no clue. I would say in the last year, I found this literature and started studying viruses and started realizing that I didn't know much. In fact, the more I get into this subject, the more humbling it becomes, because you think you got the answer, and then something comes along like this, and then realize, gosh, I don't know anything. But a bacteriophage, I don't know how many of us really knew much. Maybe you heard that term but didn't know what it was. But bacteriophages actually were used in World War II by the Eastern Bloc, Russia, to treat disease. And what it is, it's a bacteria virus, but it's very specific for the bacteria. And you can actually, through culturing, you can get a bacteriophage to target a particular bacteria. And so during the years that we were separated from Russia, they were going the bacteria route and we were going the antibiotic route. And it was very successful. Bacteriophages would cure diseases because once a bacteriophage attacks a particular bacteria and then it injects its DNA, the DNA goes into the DNA of the bacteria, and then it produces thousands of bacteriophages, and then actually the bacteria explodes, releasing these, and then these go and find more bacteria, and it's like a chain reaction, and it wipes out the whole colony of bacteria. By the way, these are found in the ocean, very prevalent in the ocean. I think it's nature's way to control bacteria, overpopulation. These things are extremely small. A bacteria, a spirochete is basically about a micron to a micron and a half in diameter, and anywhere from 5 to 30 or 40 microns long. A bacteriophage look like mosquitoes when they attack a spirochete. The problem is the research done in the bioweapons part of our government found that a bacteriophage could be used as research tools. And they studied these spirochetes by injecting virus particles using bacteriophages, because bacteriophages don't kill spirochetes, but they can be used to change their DNA. And this was the research that was done, and you can do the research on Lyme disease and find that that's what they were using to study the Lyme spirochete. As I mentioned before, bacteriophages' main duty is to control bacteria, and they were used in World War I. More people died of relapsing fever, which is another spirochete disease, than the wars, and it's like 40% fatal. And this was the spirochete that the Japanese and the Germans used spirochetes as bioweapons, and they did it through tick infestation. They'd inject them into the ticks, and the ticks would feed on the animals, and the enemy would eat the animals, and then they get relapsing fever and die by the hundreds of thousands. So the Japanese actually, there's a book called Japan's Secret Weapon, written in 1946, and it describes, one chapter describes the use of spirochetes as a bioweapon. They used it throughout China and down in Vietnam and through that whole part of the world. And in fact is, when I do microscopic examinations on Asians, there's not one that I've ever found that didn't have a spirochete. I'm going to show you this. So we now know that the bacteriophages, the herpes virus, and the plasmids are actually evolved from the same ancestral tree. So they're all basically there to change the DNA of whatever it attacks. And in spirochetes, they inject the DNA particles into the spirochete. That gets into the DNA, and they can change the virulence forms of it and actually give it antibiotic resistant and other virulent forms. Unfortunately, we have to deal with a sterilization problem, and we talked about the theoretical possibility of transmission, and especially now with management of Alzheimer's and diabetic patients. So we've got to work out some way, and I think there's sterilizers that use ozone, and we have to have ways of being able to test to see if it actually works. So these are the articles on ozone, and that's it. We used up our hour, and I thank you very much.
Dentists who study the history of dentistry and listen to the information just presented are scratching their heads now. It reminds them of what our most famous dental researcher, Dr. Weston A. Price, taught us concerning his research. He extracted teeth from patients who died of various diseases, including diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and many others. He then ground the teeth up into a powder and placed small amounts of this material within the tissue of rabbit ears. All the rabbits somehow without explanation managed to die of the same disease from which the tooth material was harvested. Does this explain the Sphinx virus in its many forms that produces at least 40 different forms of beta amyloid, that represents the many forms of chronic diseases we know today? Food for thought.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nordquist. That was a highly interesting presentation that I think gave us all a lot to think about. Thank you again for speaking with us tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you next month for next month's webinar. Good night, everyone. Thank you.